This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl. Now, Tim, did you know we have a new king?
Well, he's not. I don't believe in kings no matter what, but I think he thinks he's one.
Well, excuse me, I am the king of New York. But I would say that, in my opinion, Trump is the king of stink, king of clowns, king of chaos and confusion, king of bankruptcy, ignorance, illiteracy, idiocy, king of the most unqualified and corrupt cunts to ever enter Congress, well, at least since Nixon. He is the king of sucking corporate cocks and then ripping them off behind their back or right in front of their frickin' face. He's the king of singing praises to dictators and sucking up to kleptogenocidal cunts. He is the king of fucking immigrants, that is, the ones he fucks, and then he's fucking over all the rest of them. He is the king of bull-faced lies. At last count, and trust me, I am counting, 56,492, yes. He is the king of cheating at everything, including golf at his own golf course where he hires and then doesn't pay undocumented immigrants. He's the king of felons, frauds, and fools. But most of all, he's the king of pigs. Now, I'd like to quote from that king of illiteracy because it's astonishing to me every day, and you know my intellectual sadism has a hard on right now. So I'm just going to quote the king.
Okay.
I mean, look at the kind of things I just said. So just in case that question got elsewhere, and which I'm surprised it took so long, actually. But you know what? Ukraine is a bigger deal because people are dying by the thousands a week, thousands. But look at this. From 90 to 99. Look
Yeah.
at fucking what? Social Security, 6,054,000 people. Well, that's okay. Maybe that's possible. 92 to 90, 99, maybe it's possible. That's a lot of people, though, at that. But people that live to 100, to 109, 4,734. Where are these old timers? Wow, that's a lot. That means over 100 years old. 4 million people. I don't know. I know there's so many. I know people that are doing great in their 90s, but not too many people over 100. But over 120 from 120 years old. People that are 120 years old up to 129, 3,472,000 people. Wow.
Whoa.
You know that can't possibly be because the record is like I think is one person, a woman.
A woman from France, yeah.
To 127, but they have 3,472. Okay, but now we're going really in people from 130 years old to 139-year-old, 3,936,000. Wow. I wonder if people are getting paid with all this. I mean, are these checks? And that's what we're checking right now. Now, if that is not one of the dumbest, I mean, in spite of all the rest of the speeches he's given, absolutely incomprehensible one-way conversations by the king of idiocy, I don't know what is. What say you, Timothy?
Well, where do we even begin? I mean, do we talk about Ukraine? Do we talk about all the federal cuts? Which, by the way, we all know what's going on. These aren't going back to the people. These are being absorbed for the ridiculous tax cuts that we've been giving the rich. Basically, it really escalated since Reagan. And unfortunately, all the presidents, including the Democrats, still fall in line. So one of the greatest just for the rich tax cuts were the 2003 GW ones. And they were so outrageous, and for them to justify it, the Congress had to say, okay, that'll just be for the next 10 years, and they'll stop in 10 years because that's going to spark the economy. And unfortunately, Obama in 2013, all his advisors said, all I do is just do nothing because it expires at this minute. And sure enough, at the 11th hour and the 59th minute, Obama re-signs it for life. He basically kicks it in, and because what the point is, everyone's paid. It's so corrupt. Everyone's paid. And you think these fucking cuts of our services, our social services, privatization of everything are going to the people? Fuck no. Fuck no.
Well, and by the way, Adam Kinzinger, one of my heroes, who got out of Congress, although he was one of the youngest ones elected to Congress, had a great speech today saying when he was in Congress and they needed to make some cuts to the budget, they cut their own salaries and their own, congressional allotments by 5%. Now, hello, it's a very reasonable thing. You're cutting off the heads of the poor and feeding them to, once again, the rich. And look, I mean, it was said some time ago that, oh, Elon Idiocity, autistic, I'm going to call him Melonhead, he could, with all of his billions, help, who, by the way, takes so much money from the government, I think, what is it, 18 billion? He could feed a lot of the world's hungry, but why would he? He's too busy sucking his own dick.
And so, of course, the right wing try to justify it, and they quote Milton Friedman, and the whole thing. Oh, people are living better than ever from 500 years ago. But as Noam Chomsky says, well, 1830 slaves live better than 1730 slaves. Does that justify slavery?
And slavery is still here, because if you think $20 an hour is not slavery, when Elon, autistic, idiotic, sucking his own dick, and that of the mushroom-headed one, is making $8 million a day, you got a problem. You better reevaluate how to count those dockets.
Sorry, so we're talking about money. Today is the 83rd anniversary of the executive authorization of internment camps, the Japanese ones we had, our own concentration camps. And as we are...
Going for more now.
When we make aggressive and violent policies rooted in literal racism, it never looks good. It's never justified. It's always a failure. And
hello, Guantanamo next. I mean, what more? And that genius who loves to kill puppies, Kristi Noem. Here's another side of the story. She wants to have polygraph tests given to anybody who might be leaking information. The thing is, the whole thing's a frickin' leak of brain matter.
But why are we here? And there's a lot of reasons why we're here. One thing is,
why are we here in my kitchen in Brooklyn?
Democratic Party, basically anyone that backed Bernie Sanders in 2016, the Clinton machine basically blacklisted you if you're a Democrat. And they decided, and you can make your own justifications yourself, that maybe it's better to rally behind Liz Cheney. Now, Liz Cheney did go against Trump. However, they would rather go with Liz Cheney than Democrats that are for the people, that actually have a record siding with the people that put them in office, than big money.
Well, I have to say, the enemy of my enemy is now my friend, and I would never have in the past called Cheney my friend, but it was her and Adam Kinzinger that did try to bring to justice the absolute atrocity that was January 6th. However, how far did they get? Not very far.
So by siding with Liz Cheney, and Simon Slater brings up a good point, because one of the biggest supporters of the arts, quote unquote, is one of the Waltons from the Walmart, one of the wealthiest women in the world. And fine, she has all these programs helping artists, but should we praise these people? Do we need billionaires to solve our problems?
Absolutely not. I don't even know what our problems are.
We cut all funding, all for social programs, for art programs. Just basic
school lunches gotta go.
And then you have this billionaire coming in as a savior, and everyone claps their hands with this propaganda machine behind them. No. And
again, no.
I highly recommend everyone to 6 minutes check out the speech by the governor of Illinois yesterday. It's pretty powerful. It's accurate, but it's basically like it's gonna require us. What do you say? Tyranny.
It's Pritzker, the governor of Illinois.
Pritzker,
we need to check out his speech.
Tyranny survives on silence, apathy,
and fear.
And fear. But sometimes you got to fucking stand up.
I'm glad that there was so many protests on non-President Day, because we did not elect Elon Musk, and I don't even believe we elected Trump, because hey, election fraud. If it happened before, it's happening again. So let's face it. It's total bullshit.
Meeting with Russia. Now,
come on.
So the Ukraine thing, I actually, strange enough, I've really been following this closely since 2000.
Since it began.
No, when Obama was in office. Because
Well, wait, just one thing about Obama. Like Bill Clinton, at first they appear like good guys. They're just as corrupt and evil as the rest. I would rather have Michelle Obama, who I don't know, she's still married to a liar and somebody that sided with banks.
there's
We don't
a
even
lot
need to go
leading
into
up.
Clinton.
There's a lot leading up to this. I unfortunately I have to say, Obama and Biden, vice president, and Hillary as Secretary of State, they kind of escalated tensions with Russia that didn't need to escalate to the level they did. I mean, you surround a rat, it's gonna fucking bite. I'm just gonna say that, but that's not a justification for Putin, who's a war criminal piece of shit. And then you had John McCain, who's an old geezer, Cold War hawk, like those Ruskies. But as Trump's going and he's blaming Ukraine.
Well, projecting.
We're
starting the
so
war.
this might Russia illegally did attack Ukraine. America kind of provoked him, but the Ukrainian people suffer, and to blame them for any of this is fucking
Victim
outrageous.
blaming.
It's outrageous.
Well, he does it all the time, victim blaming. He creates the victims that he then blames for his crimes. Hello. Whether it's immigrants, women, the poor, or anybody else, he blames the victim for the crimes he has committed. Typical
and also
of the king of cunts.
Well, I mean, he loves Putin because Putin's clever enough, he goes to know, and the intelligence of Russia knows. It's sort of like Russia was really good with spying because they knew that the dorks that were holding the keys to secrets. Okay, you nerd. A 6'1" supermodel is into you. They use sex to get. I mean, are you kidding me? But the Russians know with Trump. All you do is
flatter
him, compliment him, adore him, and then they have him in their hands.
And hence their problem. Now, one of the big problems that's going to happen is anybody that doesn't agree with the king of pigs, the king of lies. But the thing is, look, he is being cock-blocked on many levels by many judges, and it is going to fall hard. And you know what? I pray, the only time I ever have in my life, for either Allah to step in and drop the frickin' bomb on his head, or for him to die of a Big Mac attack, or for somebody to have the balls to actually get the bullet in the ear this time. I'm just saying, bring me the heads.
So
this is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl. Yeah. Conspiracy of women.
Well, one other thing. I encourage people, Bernie Sanders doesn't stand a chance of being president. He's old at this point. But he is still representing, committed to the people, and he's doing a national tour in the next couple of weeks to really just
to get an education about what's actually happening.
Try to save people and push back against the propaganda that somehow what they're doing is serving the people. And he says the whole thing's a lie.
I like the quote by Zelensky, but correct me. He said Trump is living in a disinformation. Did he say sphere? A disinformation circle. Who does he even get his information from? No, but he doesn't get it from anybody.
The whole thing's sad, and of course, Europe being cut out of the talks. I understand that it goes against 80 years.
Tim, I would prefer if you just gave me 50% of all your profits from now on, so that I don't drop a bomb on your head. Come on.
Well, see, there's a sad side to the Europe thing too, and NATO thing too. Besides it being, we should represent our 80-year commitments as World War II, but a lot of people are making money off this fucking war, and France.
Hey, peace is not profitable. War is very
France is
profitable.
making a shitload of money on this thing, so they want to keep it going, even though we don't want Russia to own the land they invaded. So it's complicated.
Hey, destroy and then rebuild. Gaza, the Riviera. It's not going to happen.
I feel bad for the Ukrainian people. I feel bad for the young Russian soldiers that don't want to fight. It's
all right. I want to final horrific report. Ukrainian women, some of them in the military, some not, have just put out a report about what happens to them, what has happened to them by Russian soldiers.
Oh, yes.
Naked beatings, starving, paraded through snowy streets naked in front of everybody. I mean, and again, this is war criminals, and who are we siding with? A war criminal. And the only reason Trump, who's never been in war and doesn't realize that war, other than the enemy from within, which are basically his minions, when the war really comes here, you're going to realize you have been wrong your whole fucking life. Lydian Spin, Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, good luck to live. is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and our featured guest today, Tony O'Neill, who we go a bit back in time, have some mutual friends. Tony is an ex musician, now a writer of many novels, all of them brutal and truthful about his various escapades as a young degenerate. And the latest one, which you sent me, is that coming out soon? Forged Prescriptions?
Yeah, yeah, actually it was released yesterday officially on the 18th. Yeah,
Oh,
so
congratulations.
thank you, very proud.
Very good. I loved it, but then again, I loved writing. I know we were both in the Heroin Chronicles, which was a edition that Jerry
Yeah,
Stahl compiled,
yeah,
and
it
I
was
was
great too. I loved it. Yeah, I loved your story in it. Yeah, so it was that was a lot of fun. Jerry's great, you know. He was always a big hero of mine. Like especially when I was starting out. I mean, I remember when I read Permanent Midnight, it absolutely blew my mind. So, anytime I talk to him, I'm always like feels a little bit surreal because I'm like,
well, we've had him on the podcast. I've gone on tour with him. I absolutely adore Jerry Stahl. He's even in my documentary, Artist, Depression,
mhm.
Anxiety, and Rage, because he has all three probably. But well, congratulations on your books. Are you doing any readings for that, or what are you doing? How are you promoting
Yeah.
it other than a modest podcast?
Yeah, well, basically, the publishers at Far West Press, they're like an independent out of Hudson, New York. So we are actually just setting up, we're going to have a party in New York to kind of set to, mark the occasion. We haven't got the date pinned down yet. It's probably going to be at the Parkside Lounge. And
Oh, that's a good.
yeah, and
That's
we're
a good thing.
setting up readings. I mean, I'm like, whenever anybody asks me to read, I'm not one of those writers that hates reading. I don't mind it. I guess it's, maybe coming from a musical background, it's not as weird for me to stand up in front of people. But yeah,
Must
so we're gonna have a bunch of
must
readings.
must be done. Well, please include invite me if not include me.
Of
Or
course, of course. I'd love to do, I'd love to do something with you, like you're another big hero of mine. So,
I'm not even going to ask about what. But here we are starting off again. I was talking to Kathy Unsworth today. She sends her regards.
oh, of course, she's fantastic. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a kind of small world when there's, yeah, particular types of artists. I feel like, there's people that write books with these certain things. We all seem to find each other eventually. So
You know, I don't know if this is true, but I think she might have been the first one to expose me to your writing. I've got to
really.
consult her on that. Could have,
Ah,
could
yeah.
be, yes.
That's very interesting because I've never actually met her in person. I've read her stuff, and we have people in common that we know and stuff like that. I think she's friends with Richard Cabot, who was at 3 a.m. magazine, and he was the first one to publish anything of mine anywhere. So yeah, I always remember that, and that was a huge deal because 3 a.m. had also published Dan Fante, another hero of mine, which is how I
Yeah,
found
it was a great magazine. Absolutely. Yeah.
him.
So, I mean, yeah, that's what we often refer to it as the connective tissue on this podcast because look, we've done many episodes. I didn't know everyone that we've done. I love references, but we do know some of the people. But it's how connected we all are by either our stubbornness and unrelenting insistence on no matter what, carrying on and road dogging it if must be. Let's go back to the origins of your existence. So you were in a number of, confrontational music, well, at least the Brian Jonestown Massacre. What did you do in the Brian Jonestown Massacre?
Oh, I'm a keyboard player. So basically, I mean, I was in a lineup of the band that was probably the most fucked up and abortive lineup of the band. Um, there was a point where Anton had got angry over something and fired the entire band and wanted to hire new musicians to do some gigs. He had a gig at the Troubadour booked, and he basically was any musicians he knew that shared a heroin dealer. That was who it was. So,
Ah,
so and so I remember the drummer was like on crystal meth. Everybody else was on heroin, and we rehearsed for about 4 or 5 months, and one by one, it was like 10 little Indians. Anton fired one member after another for some transgression until actually me, the drummer, and Anton were the last one standing, and Anton still wanted to do the gig. He's like, we'll do it like the fucking Doors, man. We'll get an organ. Yeah. And then he ended up firing me and the drummer at the same time.
He
Do you,
was on
do
the
you think that
podcast.
House, actually.
He was on the podcast a few weeks ago as
do you
well.
think that was like kind of you think that was kind of a sadistic, sometimes people, I've, as a professional musician, I'm not gonna name names, I've rolled with people who can get really insane musicians, but they choose to get a lot of crackheads and all that stuff because it allows them to be sadists. And because they're paying them, they're kind of fucking with people's addictions, and then they can just be, whatever they want to them.
With Anton, I mean, he's doing a lot better now. That was a period when I know, obviously he was doing a lot of drugs because I was doing a lot with him, but he's another survivor. I don't even know if it was, in that case, it was as thought out as that, as in it was just more the drugs were causing friction in the band, I guess. So the solution would be to get everybody on drugs, and then everybody would be on the wavelength. Except, Anton, he was funny. Those people, so not everybody reacts to heroin the same way. So we'd have some of us who were like, nodding out, other people who'd get hyperactive when they were on it. And then the drummer was on speed, so he was playing twice. So it was.
And then other people die. That's another reaction. Yeah.
Yeah. So
the people who died, as Jim Carroll once so brilliantly said. I keep my sadism out of the musical realm, except when aimed at the audience. I don't bring my sadism to work with the pace. Tim will attest to that.
Do you still perform music?
No, not really. I still play for my own pleasure. But when the last band I was in London, and I had a band with Kelly Alley. She was the singer with the Sneaker Pimps, and it was her kind of solo thing. We had a deal with one little Indian, and I remember playing this show at one point, and my very first gig was at 18. I got hired to play for Marc Almond. And then the next band
Keyboards or drums? Keyboards or drums?
Keyboards, always keyboards. Yeah.
Okay.
And in a weird way, it felt like everything after that was kind of decreasing circles, in terms of like what kind of success we got. In a weird way, I mean, like I jumped straight in on doing world tours and playing to these big audiences. And then, as my drug use kind of made me more unreliable and I bounced from band to band, I just remember at the end just thinking, I don't want to do this anymore. I was just exhausted. I'm like, we just had a kid, or a daughter, Nico had just been born. And I'm like, do I really want to just keep trying this and being out on the road? And I had so many bad experiences. I didn't know what I wanted to do next, but I did know I wanted to walk away from
Did you consider yourself a writer? Did you consider yourself a writer, even though you weren't published yet? As your spirit, I should say, was that more of a literary spirit or a musical spirit, you think, in your youth?
I mean, I definitely, when I found writing, I mean, it fit me in a way that music maybe didn't, and I think it's probably just part of my personality, but I do like something. On the creative side, I don't have to do it with a bunch of other people. I can do it anywhere. And, probably a thing that, people who are attracted to heroin, they like to live in their own heads, and so do writers, so I've been clean for a long time, but I do still love to live in my head, and, writing is the way to do it. And I never had considered writing anything. I wrote the first book, Digging the Vein, because I decided I got to get clean. I got a newborn, and I came off of everything. I came off of methadone, heroin, and it was really rough at first. I say, there was the sickness, but then I was like horribly depressed for about 7 or 8 months afterwards.
I believe it.
What year was that when you first came off and decided, okay, I'm going to start writing? When you had your child, what year was that?
Oh, that was 2003. So
okay.
Yeah, she's 21. She's at like college now. So it's like, it doesn't feel like a long time ago, but it was. And So
So
really,
let's start for a minute. With the Marc Almond band, were you already doing drugs? I mean, Marc isn't big. I mean, he's pretty straight and it's not totally straight and narrow. Let's put it this way, but
Back
he's
back in
still
the
a
day, he
heroin
I
addict.
read
yeah,
some
when I
stuff.
knew him, no. I mean, and also me, no, too. I mean, I was from a small town in the north of England. I was kind of naive. I wasn't exposed to like, beyond like, smoking pot or whatever, you know. That was like my first time in London was when I moved down to join the band.
I
And
mean,
Mark,
how did you even get invited to join the band?
Well, Mark's from the
it was
north also, right? Mark's from the north.
yeah, he's from
Yeah.
Southport, and I'm from a little town called Blackburn that you will never have heard of. It's somewhere between Manchester and Liverpool.
Okay.
I hated it, and I
Sure.
always spent like I spent the first 18 years waiting to get out. There was just not really a lot there. Um, it was the one and only time I ever answered one of those ads in the back of the Melody Maker, and that's how I got the
Unbelievable.
gig.
Well, a lot of people answer those ads. So is that just winning the lottery? Or why were you selected? Did you like
I
give him
I
a
have
headshot or something?
to this day, I got no idea. All I know is I had a demo tape of one of my bands, and I sent that off. I didn't even know who it was for. Looking back, I don't know what possessed me to answer this ad. There was just something about it, and I remember like some friend at college was like, "You should do it. You should do it." So I did. I sent it off,
And you
and
were
I was
18.
I
You were
was
18.
18. Yeah, yeah. I was due to start university the next year. I was going to study music at university, and when I got the call from Mark's management saying, hey, it was Marc Almond, whose music I loved, and do you want to come down to London for an audition? I immediately deferred the university for a year, deferred my play so I could go down for the audition, and never ended up going back. Um, and yeah, I remember like my dad drove me down to London. I was a kid basically. Drops me off in the studio in central London where Marc is recording an album with PJ Proby. So suddenly I'm in a studio with PJ Proby, Marc, and Neil X from like Seek Seek Sputnik.
And probably a $500,000 synclavier. I know, and you probably had what, some homemade synths at the time. I mean, well, no, I'm serious about the equipment. Like that's kind of insane what you're probably dealing with is suddenly what you're dealing with.
Yeah. Well, I remember I auditioned on a piano that was in the studio. There was like a grand piano, and Mark's album Fantastic Star was coming out then, and there was this song on it called Child Star. And I worked out how to play that, and we did it. We played that, and then we played Sail Away, Wave Goodbye. And he was like, "Do you want to join? Would you want? Because we'd love to have you." And that was it. It was
He
like,
was already well, he was established by that point.
oh yeah, totally, yeah, yeah. I
He's
mean, this was
already quite
probably
big.
his like seventh or eighth solo album. I mean, like he was like yeah, an established figure, definitely for a long time
Pretty,
at that
pretty
point.
big.
Like,
Yeah.
it
Oh,
was
and really a
huge.
nice guy. Marc Almond was always very sweet.
That's the thing. When I got down to London, he really looked after me. He took it upon himself to make sure I was eating. I ended up moving. He lived in Chelsea then, in this big like old church in Chelsea that had been converted. And I found a room up the road. It was on Gunter Grove, and I had a one room in a house share with a bunch of Australian backpackers and stuff. And he'd have me over like for dinner. He'd make sure I ate, and he'd try and keep me away from the people he knew that were probably trouble. Put it this way, when we kind of lost touch, especially when I went to LA and I kind of went off the deep end. Um, and when I wrote the second book, Down and Out on Murder Mile, and that was the one that came out on a bigger publisher, that came out on HarperCollins. Marc found me because he'd read the book, and he was like, it's been a long time. I really loved the book. And the first thing he asked was, it's not my fault this happened, is that? I was like, no, I'd not done any heavy drugs really until I'd moved to Los Angeles.
Interesting.
And then that's where, I mean, that's where I tried heroin for the first time, speed, crack, it was, everything was just, I was surrounded by it in LA, and I just went crazy, I did. I was small town kid, a year and a bit later, I'm in LA, and I just went nuts. I don't think I ever said no when somebody said, you want to try this, you know. I don't think no ever
You
came
had to
out of
make
his
up for your early teenage years.
mouth.
So let's go back to earlier in your childhood. Like, when did you pick up the keyboard? But before that, what were you reading as a youngster that impacted you?
Yeah, well, the keyboard, I picked it up. I remember like somebody got like a little toy keyboard for Christmas one year for me. I must have been like maybe 6, and I tinkered around on it and had taught myself to play some stuff. And then my folks were like, "Would you like to take lessons?" And I was like, "Sure." And I just took to the keyboard really easily. It just like, that was my instrument. I'm still somebody like you put a guitar in my hand, I don't know which way is up on a guitar, but like keyboards just made sense to me somehow. So
So you're at 6 years old, you're tinkering away, and you eventually take some lessons.
uh-oh.
And what were you reading at the time? Is and not at 6, but when you were a little bit older, before
Yeah,
you
when
ran
I,
away to join Marc Almond's band.
yeah, well, I was a big reader. I mean, like, I grew up in a house where, we never had books in the house. Neither my parents were really readers. And I think they kind of looked at it with this kind of bemused thing that I would spend money on books. And I was like one of those kids when I was like 10, I was reading like Stephen King. And then when I was like in high school, I remember discovering writers like the one that made the biggest impact on me was definitely Burroughs. I remember reading Naked Lunch at around 15 or 16, and it just completely blew my mind. I didn't understand 75% of it, but it was something so different from any other book I'd ever read. And that one I still, it's now I really think it's probably if somebody put a gun to my head and said, "What is your favorite book? You can keep one book." That would probably be it because it's still a book I pick up and reread now and then. But yeah, so that was a big one for me,
But then that
definitely.
leads to other writers. I mean, when you get,
Exactly. Yeah.
get into that channel, then there were no books in my house either. I don't even know how I found the books of Hubert Selby and Henry Miller, still my
Mhm.
favorite writer. Or the Grove Press translation. I think Grove Press translation of the Marquis de Sade. I have no
Oh yeah.
idea how I found these books, but if
Mhm.
I had, I wouldn't be here talking to you. Probably, I'd probably be
Well,
in prison.
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's especially in that pre-internet days, you had to really work at it, and you'd find the connections between the writers. If any article about them, you'd be reading obsessively, and if they mentioned another writer, So it was the same way with music too. But yeah, that was, writing was kind of my personal thing. The school I
Did you keep
went to was like.
diaries as a kid? Were you keeping diaries or journals?
No, not really. I remember thinking, oh, being a writer would be amazing, but it just seemed like something that somebody who grew up in a town like me, they just don't do that. There was, it never occurred to in school, I would write, and I remember like once I wrote something, some story, and it came back with a note. This is excellent. Is everything okay at home? Like so I was
Hmm.
writing stuff that was, you know, stuff that I got from other writers and I was kind of regurgitating it. It really wasn't until life had kind of eaten me up and spat me out a bit that I had anything real to write about that wasn't just me trying to imitate writers I loved. And when I did get around to writing the first book, Dig in the Vein, I didn't even realize what I was doing until it was almost done. I was just kind of writing stuff down to keep myself sane because I was, sick and in this black depression, and I know I need to get out of it. And when you're a junkie, you get clean, and suddenly you start looking back and you start seeing it through rose-tinted glasses. And I knew that was dangerous, so I started writing stuff down, the particularly horrible stuff that had happened, and it just I got into a flow with it. And I remember at one point going, God, this is like book length, and it just sort of appeared. It took me about 9 months, and surprised me as much as anyone when I realized it was a book. Still had no thought of getting it published. Everything happened kind of by accident, and thank God it
How did
did.
you, how did you get Dig in the Vein? How did you get your first book published?
Well, we moved from London to New York. My wife, Vanessa, is a New Yorker. When when Nico was born, we got priced out of London. So it was like, we were like, we're gonna have to be close to one set of parents. She was in fashion, I'm in writing. Do we go to Blackburn or New York? It was a question. So we went to New York. And before I was going through the green card thing, I didn't have I didn't have my paperwork yet. So I was doing like under the table work for a friend, like out in Queens. We'd be like putting like metal fences in and stuff. And I remember I got an internship at a publishing house called Contemporary Press, and it was unpaid, but I'm like, oh, I can do this. And, like maybe just being around writers would be interesting. And that was it. It was just, I started out as an intern and I was the worst intern possible. I didn't know how to do anything, but they liked me. And I just, we just ended up hanging out. And then I remember sticking the book on the slush pile one day and not saying anything. And yeah, and that was it. That was the first thing. Um, then John Giorno was the first person that was like a hero of mine who read the book and said something nice about it. And again, that was one of those random things. I had that William Burroughs box set, remember that nice box set that came out? And in the booklet, it had the phone number and the address for Giorno Poetry Systems, 222 Battery, right? And I remember Vanessa one day saying, like, you should call up, see if they, if they want somebody to do stuff for free. It'd be cool just to see it. And I was like, I should do that. I had nothing to do. So I called thinking nothing was going to happen. And about like 3 or 4 days later, I come home and there's a message from Giorno on my answering machine. I ended up going over there and meeting him, and he hired me to help with this project. They were doing this kind of cataloging thing of this photographer friend of his who'd passed away. So I ended up working in the bunker for like 6 months with this.
Why you're rubbing up against like Burroughs and Giorno. I mean, by default, almost. How many joints a day was Giorno smoking at that point? Because he has a heavy fucking pot smoker, that dude.
Oh, he was. I remember when the first time I met him, he buzzed me in, and I walked up to the top floor, and his door, and he was like he was coming out on stage with dry ice. I just remember clouds of smoke, and then he came out, and yeah. It was great because I was, I was clean, but my version of clean, which was back then, I still drank, I still smoked weed, and I was glad he was, because he's people, like the survivors from the '60s, some of them were like all clean, like I didn't know what it was going to be like with him, but he was so fucking cool and one of the nicest, sweetest people ever.
I did with him in Europe, yeah.
Yeah.
Very nice guy.
And he read the book before it was published and wrote this nice thing that I put on the blurb on the back cover when it did get published. And for me, for Burroughs obsessive, it was like the greatest like 6 months of my life. Showing up I had to go to the bunker every day, sit there. It was still exactly as it was when Burroughs left. I mean, it was so bizarre. And it was like, I'd read every book about the bunker and all the bios, and to be sat there, it was really fucking strange. But what an amazing, amazing thing to happen,
Well, and it's like when I knocked on Hubert Selby's door and asked him if he knew how important it was to my generation, to which he said no. And I said, I'm going to tell you. Kind of the same thing. I'm going to tell you how important you are. All right, whatever, you had no idea. Why don't you do a little...
Real quickly, was Burroughs a gateway? Did you go even more abstract? I mean, did you go even further? I mean, was that your gateway to other stuff, or is it like?
Oh yeah, it was. I mean, I feel like, but if you're following the kind of line, Burroughs is almost an end to himself. Like he went, but there's all this other stuff that branched off. I mean, I was reading everything from the Marquis de Sade. I was reading, I looked everywhere for Herbert Huncke's book in England and finally found a copy. I was so curious. Alexander.
By the way, I'm going to send you a recording that I did with the music from Tim on a piece as if Herbert Huncke wrote it. And it's a piece that I wrote for the Rolling Stone Book of Beats.
Oh, fantastic.
Well,
That would be
nobody knows
great.
about him. He was junkie. He
Yeah,
was,
yeah. Right till the end. Yeah, I know. I never met Hunky, but I did meet this guy Lackey who was doing a documentary on him at the end. So he would he shared the unfinished documentary with me and all this kind of raw footage because he'd read my book and wrote to me and knew I was a fan. So that was really cool to kind of get a
I
peek
mean,
in.
but I mean, wasn't he being supported by the Grateful Dead at the end of his life, living in the Chelsea Hotel? I think he
That's what
was.
I heard. And I think that is, again, it's, as I get older, I realize when I was 18, I thought anyone who had a book in bookstores or a record in record
Was
stores
rich.
was rich. They had a swim,
Yeah.
they never had to worry. And then when I hear things like, I heard, recently about like David Johansen, he's ill and he's like, raising money for treatment. And I'm like, how
Very
how does the
unfaithful
guy
in
from the New
hospice at the end of her life. I mean, yeah.
yeah. And it's like it's James Chance. You always hear these things, these people, they make this enormous contribution and they don't have any real financial security, at the end of it. It's
Shelby
hard,
was
it's
a
horrible.
was an accountant for a university when I met him. This was
Wow.
before this was before the film of Last Exit to Brooklyn came out. Of course,
Mhm.
Requiem for a Dream. The film was fantastic. I mean,
Well,
and the
yeah.
book break
Stephen
down page.
Yes.
Stephen Foster was the biggest American songwriter in the late 1900s. Player piano scrolls and all this stuff. The biggest name and
Mhm.
American folk hero, and then died in the Bowery in a gutter. Just
Yeah. It's
good
it's hard.
luck.
It really is horrible. And when I hear things like the hunky thing, of musicians like reaching out and helping out, because I was like, man, how many actually, there are musicians, I'm sure, who are multimillionaires who were inspired by
We're
the
not
New
helping
Wave,
anybody.
and it's
Financial
like,
amnesia. By the way, when I first met Jerry Stahl, he had 7 unpublished books. One of the reasons him and Hubert Selby are my heroes is Jerry Stahl has a career that there has not been a career that is more seismic like an earthquake, up, down, up, down, up, down, and still should be one of the richest because of all of the billionaire butt boys who solicit him, should buy him a life. Pisses me off. I actually have threatened to write to the actors who solicit him and $500 million to play Iron Man. Fuck you, Robert Downey Jr. I will for a cool million just to give it to Jerry Stahl. Just saying. Why don't you give us a little reading from something, Tony O'Neill?
oh, sure, sure, okay.
What are you going
Um,
to read? The
uh,
latest?
let's see. Yeah, yeah. This is from Forged Prescriptions. I'll read you a little bit from a story that's called Friday Night at Paco's Crack House. Little slice of life. Now, I will just say before I start, not everything I write is autobiographical. None of this is. These are, this is all pure fiction. But, a lot of stuff inspired by stuff I saw.
Well, it's as real as it gets without having to go through every fucking minutia of living it every minute of your life.
Yes. Hold on. I'm going. This film's not being used, right? Because I'm going to put on a horrible pair of readers. I'm like getting
That's
all
all
this
right.
like
We
horrible.
do that when it's dark.
That's the bar of my Mrs. Readers. I didn't have a pair. Okay. Johnny holds out the still smoking pipe to Joan. Thank you, kind sir, she says, reaching for it. As she takes her hit, Johnny begins talking, almost to himself. When I was 6, Johnny said, my best friend and I killed a boy. She exhaled. Her ears rang, but she'd been smoking all afternoon. It didn't really get her high. It helped avert the crash for a little while longer. That was enough. She handed the pipe back and gave Johnny a curious look. I'm interested, Johnny said. Tell me more. He was maybe 3 years old. We took him, my friend and me, from the local mall. Saturday afternoon in the suburbs, the place was rammed, and we just walked him away from his mom while she was looking through a sales rack. Took him right out of the mall down to the train tracks. Is that where you did it? I mean, is that where you killed him? Yeah. It was like a pile of bricks lying around. So my friend hit him on the head with one hard. He was hurt, but still moving. So I stabbed him in the throat with my pocket knife. Jesus Christ, Johnny says. That's heavy, man. Why'd you do it? Johnny shrugged. From the look on his face, Johnny figured he'd been asked this plenty in his life. I wanted to see what it would feel like, I guess. She nodded slowly. So? So what? So what did it feel like? Johnny's face gets this thoughtful, faraway look. Honestly, felt kind of cheap, two-dimensional, like some bad TV program. What happened next? Well, we covered the body up with branches and shit. My friend Frankie, he had an asthma attack, nerves, I guess. Did you get busted? Oh, big time. We were dumb kids, not even smart enough to try and cover our tracks. There were 7 or 8 witnesses who saw us leaving with the kid. It was a small town, so people recognized us. We made the national news. Pretty big deal. We were tried in another state because they were scared we were going to get lynched or some shit. Court-appointed shrinks, lawyers arguing whether we should be tried as adults, the works. Went on for months and months before they decided what to do with us. They put Frankie in a state hospital and I got kid prison. They locked me up till I turned 18. And then they were meant to turn us both loose, state law. I was the only one who made it out, though. And what happened to your friend? I heard he turned queer in the nut ward. Some schizo boyfriend stabbed him like 37 times. He was 15 when it happened. That's tough. Life's tough. I kept my head down until they turned me loose. It was a whole process. They changed my name. I used to be called Adam. Now I'm Johnny. After Johnny Be Good, you know?
They're all fucking Johnnies, if you ask me. And that's from the latest that just came out this week, Forged Prescriptions, correct? Now, what about the Six City in development with Bret Easton Ellis? What's going on with that?
Well, yeah, that's been going on for a while. I mean, I always like joke with my wife that like I'm never sell enough books to make any money, but seems like I've got a very small fan base, but they're all like there always seem to be like kind of interesting, cool fellow artists. I mean, I read American Psycho when it came out, and again, that was another like one that like I was like, holy shit, you're allowed to write this stuff down, like they completely freaked me out, and
Great movie too. I mean, come
yeah.
on, Dale. Wow, wow.
Yeah, it was actually, and and then I read all of his other stuff after that, and so out of the blue one day, somebody emails me and goes, "You seemed like Bret Easton Ellis is posting about Six City on I don't know, it was on his Instagram or something." And I didn't have any social media at the time, and I'm like, "Really?" Um, and that, I mean, still to this day, I get so many people like, I found your book through Bret, like him doing this one post, like got me so many, it was amazing. And he's also, he optioned Six City. It's wanted to turn it into a series. I know he wrote a pilot. There's a pilot in existence written by him. It was getting some steam right before the pandemic and kind of like lost steam again, but it introduced me to Bret. I got to meet him, and I've actually ended up writing a bunch of screenplays, and we've got one right now that's kind of picking up some speed. It's with the casting right now, and it's a book. You might find this interesting. A book set in the LA punk scene, 1980s, among like street kids, street hustlers in the hardcore scene. And it was based on a book called What We Do Is Secret by writer Hillsbury, Thornkeith Hillsbury. It's a fantastic book. We had to change the name because somebody else did a film with that title, but it was this amazing book that the director brought to me and has been wanting to adapt it for years. And yeah, and it was a lot of fun to write,
And let's hope something comes to fruition, because I mean, when you write a book, you don't even know if it's going to be published. It's published, amazing. Writing for TV movies, it's such a crapshoot. It can take so long, or it can happen in a minute, or you can get completely ripped off.
Yeah, oh, totally. I mean, that's the thing. It's like I've plenty of writers just got so disillusioned with it because there's so much money floating around. And I know from living in Hollywood before, everybody promises you everything and not everybody delivers. So I have a very kind of laissez-faire attitude with anything screenplay related. It's like buying a lottery ticket to me. You write it, you send it off in the universe, and I don't want to hear about it unless somebody's filming it because I can't get fixated on the, oh, it's happening, oh, it's not happening, because it would send me around the bend, you know?
It's just, I just asked Jerry Stahl about that, about not getting paid enough for the stuff he's written,
Oh yeah.
especially that's been translated into films. It's ridiculous.
Oh yeah,
I
and
mean,
he's a great screenwriter. That
they're
Escape from
looking
the Horror Show we did was amazing.
say that again.
The Escape from Dannemora show Jerry wrote, that was fucking brilliant. So good. I mean, yeah, he's a, triple threat. He's so good,
And he
Yeah.
still performs with me at small bars or clubs. I mean, the first time he ever got paid for reading was when I decided to take him on tour. I'm like, are you
Mm,
shitting? I don't read at bookstores because I don't get paid to do it. This is ridiculous. Same with
mhm.
Selby. I mean, most writers you know, just don't get
Yeah.
paid to read. You don't go sell the books for the bookstore so you can get a quarter later. Don't think
Mm.
so. Not my style. Don't do that.
No,
Do you
However,
that's
just
smart.
when you read, do you just kind of wing it? And since you have a history of performance, you're just kind of like you know what you're doing, or do you actually really consider the cadences, the pauses, the tempos?
Oh, yeah, I do. I do. I mean, this is the thing. I got a crash course in writing and promoting a book then when the first one came out, because it wasn't something I'd thought about, or hadn't been a long-term ambition of mine. And I remember like going to readings and trying to figure out what people did right and what people did wrong, And I've seen readings by people whose books I love and they just can't read. It's just
terrible,
like,
some of them.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. And that's the worst. It's like being back in school. Like you're just sat there, your ass is going numb, and somebody's fucking like reading it out like they're reading the shopping list. And it's like, could be the greatest words in the
Oh,
world.
it can ruin it. I mean, so you can be Beethoven, and
Uh-huh.
if someone can't play the shit, you're not going to know how good that fucking piece
Mhm.
It's
is.
why I teach spoken word workshops. I know you're right. How do you read? And actually, the first person I did that with was Kathy Unsworth because
Ah,
she
wow.
had seen me perform numerous times. She once even fainted at one of my spoken word shows. She said I opened her third eye. And when her first book came out, I'm like, Kathy, you got to do readings. I said, well, let me help you, send me the
Oh, that's
text.
fantastic.
And I do it mostly for women, but I've done workshops. It's very important because there's just a few basic things to know. So
Yeah.
I mean, they're very important. I have a workshop from the page to the stage.
Well, what about Tony? What about the opposite? Someone who's writing as but their reading and performance and their conviction is kind of
Well, that
Yeah.
might
whoa.
be that
You
might be
see
better.
that too. Totally, totally. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, if you're selling it, you really sell the words,
Yeah, totally.
you can be reading anything and you can, hypnotize an audience,
That's what I call it, mass hypnosis. But then you look at actors who don't write their own words,
Mhm.
can deliver incredibly, and then you look at comedians that may or may not write their own words and can
Mhm.
deliver incredibly, and then you look at some of the best authors and then they suck on stage. So what are
Yeah.
you gonna
I mean, so to answer your original question, what I did was, I mean, like, when I heard a reader I really liked, I was like, what did they do? And I had, like off the top of my head, I remember seeing like Irvine Welsh read his stuff the first time, and he's a great reader. It was like I was in it with him, it was fantastic. Obviously, not to bring up Burroughs again, but all it takes, I mean, he was a great reader because he just had a great fucking voice, It was like you could listen to that voice all day, I'm not blessed with a voice like that, so I got to work a little harder for it. But yeah,
No,
it was
no,
like,
but yeah, no, because again, not to digress, because you have a history of performance, but since you really think about this, with Marc Almond, were you a keyboardist that was kind of in the background of the stage, or did he want you up there kind of selling it? I mean, keyboardists are usually often kind of just a little to the side and to the back. And so I'm just wondering what your history of performance is with that and
well,
leading up to your reading.
yeah, I mean, I was, but with the way the live shows, I would play the keyboard. There was a couple of points where I would have to get up and we would just do a piano and vocal thing.
Okay.
We do this Jacques Brel song and do some of the like soft cell stuff. Um, and it was naked. There's no backing tapes. Any bum note, everybody's going to hear it. Really made me a better musician. Now, when you're playing with Marc, Marc is the visual focus,
Sure.
but being on stage, I mean, like, you know, I did have to like figure out pretty quickly what do I wear? I'm not gonna like stand up in front of all these people. And my next band was this band called Kaniki. They were like signed to EMI, and I joined the band for their first album. And they were one of those bands that were like big in England at the kind of tail end of the Britpop thing. Didn't really make it over here. That's the band I landed in LA the first time touring with.
Okay.
And that one, you know, I was a lot more show offy. It was like a lot more fun. The keyboard parts were pretty simple, so you could just like, you know, it was yeah. You know, I guess there was a part of me, this shy 18-year-old kid from a small town, who was a bit of a show off because I'd never have people looking at me like that before.
What was what cash advance did EMI give that band?
Oh man, I have no idea. But all I know is I mean, it was a great wildlife. I got to, you know, I got to fulfill one childhood fantasy, which was I played Top of the Pops. And, you know, growing up in England,
Right.
every Thursday night when Top of the Pops was on, I watched it religiously, no matter who was on.
I mean,
And
you're a bit of a youngster as opposed to myself. So, what music were you really into? 'Cause you were born in '78.
yes, yeah.
I was already on stage while you were in diapers, honey. So you're born in '78. So
Yeah.
and you joined Marc Almond when you're 18. What music were you into though before you
Well,
joined Marc Almond?
it's, you know, it's kind of funny. I mean, the first thing that I really got into, it was so like not even my thought process about, oh, I'm going to be in a rock and roll band. I was upset. I was really into jazz. That was the first thing. But like the really abrasive shit like Ornette Coleman and Cecil Taylor, you know. And you know, I remember I think there was a point when I was 14 or 15, and my fantasy would have been to be like the fucking Cecil Taylor of the northwest of England. You know, it was like
Who I
I
opened for once. Who I opened for once, which was amazing.
wow,
And
no shit, really? Wow.
it was an American All Tomorrow's Party that Thurston Moore was hosting. But I mean, Tim was studied under Yusuf Lateef, a master also.
Okay.
So I mean,
Well, we saw. I mean, so Cecil Taylor, before he died just a couple years ago, you know, lived to 89. Rest in peace. Cocaine and champagne every day to the end. But he
Yeah,
was,
well,
I mean, pretty insane. But there was a couple. So he would go to KGB bar was his bar in Manhattan. But he lived in Fort Greene, and there was what was the other one in Brooklyn? You'd always run into him. He'd be in the corner, skinny, with his little champagne and an ascot, and surrounded by young white twinks, and just holding court. He was he was
Fantastic.
Hero.
Oh, that's good. I love hearing that kind of stuff about people whose music. I love that they were living the life. That's good, you know.
well. The thing is, I mean, first of all, for being out of the closet as a black man, you know, the homophobia, let's be honest, in the black community can be pretty real, and playing free jazz,
Mhm.
he was totally ostracized, and he would run on stage during other people's jazz sets in between their sets to try to cram 15 minutes of his playing out, and you'd be dragged out. So I mean, he was in it. He was committed to the
he moshed the stage.
and yeah, got him an
So how do you
amazing.
get turned on to out jazz at 14?
Probably I think there was a teacher at school maybe at like, you know, we had music lessons at school that were compulsory, and I just didn't really take because I was like so far ahead. I wasn't, you know, sitting there learning how to read music. And I remember like one teacher in particular took an interest and would kind of like mention things that maybe you might like this, maybe you might like that, you know. And you know, it would be like back then you'd have to like save up and buy a record unheard because there was no way to
And then
listen.
grab it and run home with it in your
Yeah.
hand, like you know, the
Although
tastiest thing.
Tony, I've done these tours in the north of England. There'd be little society clubs. You know, they wouldn't own a venue for, but they'd find
Mhm.
one, and and big name. I mean, Peter Brosnan. I mean, they would bring. I know Newcastle would, and Liverpool had some spots. Leeds, of course. There were definitely spots where if you were paying attention, which it's not so easy to even know what's out there sometimes.
Yeah.
But those towns would represent back music. Of course, there'd be 20
Nice.
people, 20 old guys in the audience, and no one really
Huh.
gave a shit. But
I've had a few of those myself. So, what came after out jazz or, abrasive jazz for you?
I think like, the I really started paying attention to music like kind of when the whole like Britpop thing started in like 94. I was like, I was like the right age for it. I was like 14 or 15. We're hearing like Suede for the first time, Animal Nitrate, loved it, And again, it's like the same thing with the books. You listen to Suede and it sends you back to David Bowie and all the stuff they were inspired by. And I kind of soon I was just like, I'm going to rock and roll, But yeah, the Britpop era was a great era to be that age. I mean, I remember like, I had a band with some friends when I was 16, and it was like everybody was in a band then. It was like if you were working class and from the north, it was almost like that was a way out, like join a band. And it seemed real, it seemed possible because they were signing everybody, at that point. There was like a feeding frenzy, You'd hear about somebody there, town over, and their band got signed and they're in, so it was a very exciting period. But I mean, with like the Marc Almond thing, I'd gone back and I was really into like the whole new romantic thing, which I'd obviously been too young, but I'd missed. But I did like all of the kind of the look and the glamour and the kind of, obviously it was very Britpop wasn't very synth based. I'm a keyboard player, so of course I loved that. And in a way, the town I grew up in, the biggest fuck you could ever give anyone, the most threatening thing would be to be openly gay or even present that way, right?
Or
That was
fashionable.
possible. Yeah,
and
yeah.
you could argue new romantic came from the north and was kind of appropriated by London. I mean, a lot of those the original ones. It's interesting, but even as a 6-year-old, you probably heard some of the new romantic stuff on the radio, right?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
And
You couldn't go to the Blitz, but you could at least
no.
see him on Top of the Pops.
Yeah, that was the cool thing about, if you grow up in England, it's like, Top of the Pops, it had all of the shitty pop junk, but there'd also be at least one or two cool, interesting things. I mean, there's certain shows I remember seeing certain appearances that I
What was
still
your favorite? What's your favorite Bowie album?
Low. I'm a I love Low. Or
I
Station
would
to
say
Station too, but
I would say Diamond Dogs and Aladdin Sane.
It's so hard to pick. It's like I could be in a different mood and pick probably, any album from like the 70s period and the early 80s. And then, I mean, even like fucking Black Star is the best final album, the highest note you could possibly go out on,
Okay,
right?
this is a question. Have you ever heard Mick Ronson's Slaughter on 10th Avenue?
Yes. Yes,
The
I
album
have.
is absolutely one of my favorite glam albums. I think Bowie stole a lot for Aladdin Sane for it. It's
Mhm.
just I play it all the time. I still do. I just love it. Why don't you give us another little taste of your Forge
Okay.
prescriptions? Now
All
you
right.
got me all excited. I have to calm down with the reading here.
Okay, I'll depress you now. Hold on.
I doubt it, but you'll actually probably cheer me up. So I'm always happy. I'm an optimist. I know the world's going to end soon. I love it.
Yeah, I'm going to read. This is a bit from a story called Waiting for CJ, and it's one of those things. Like I said, it's fiction, but sometimes when you're writing something that's purely fictional, you end up writing something actually really autobiographical. And I didn't realize this was I was writing about my own shit here, but yeah, I'll read it. You'll kind of understand what I'm saying. Outside, the sky was clear and brilliant. The world seemed utterly oblivious to the fate of my friend. I wondered absently who would win out. In a way, it didn't matter. Death or death on credit were the only options CJ had to work with. Now, you might feel that my decision to take the dope seems somehow selfish or callous even, but the simple truth is this. When you've got a habit like mine, free will is an illusion. That's why I couldn't stay mad at CJ over him scoring from Gordo without me. Of course he did, the poor bastard. If the situation were reversed, I would have done the same fucking thing. It ain't right, and it certainly ain't nice. It just is. I'm a junkie, and while I'm using, my habit is non-negotiable. This is the truth. Love, honesty, a sense of morality, all of that shit that determines a person's basic character is, for an addict like me, an unaffordable luxury. And the worst part of all, I can see my actions clearly, even as I'm doing the awful thing that will alienate my few remaining friends, make my mother cry, and inflict long-lasting, deep emotional scars upon the one I love the most in the world, the one who stuck by me when all the others left, the one who repeatedly asked the unanswerable questions. Why isn't my love enough? Why do you always have to destroy everything? The shame and the guilt and the self-hatred are almost unbearable, but there's no stopping it when the wheels are in motion. All you can try and do is file down the sharper edges with more dope, more booze, more lies, more betrayal, more, until one of two things happen. Either the day comes that you somehow manage to see the place where the road runs out is fast approaching, and you have the forethought to slam on the brakes, make it for real this time, burn your old life to the ground, and finally have the balls to walk through the flames without fear or hesitation, to allow yourself to be reborn, naked, vulnerable, a shell-shocked child in an adult's half-knackered body. Or the day comes when you walk in on death, shooting dice with your crack dealer to decide who's going to get the pink slip for your rust bucket of a soul.
Oh, that's gorgeous. Thank you so much, Johnny. I mean, yes, that was and is so many people's dilemma. Exactly what you said.
This is true, and I feel sometimes, when I talk about it, I sometimes I make light. I will say that it's my addiction has been such a double-edged sword, because in one way I never would have had the books, but another way it completely derailed so much of my life. And still I'm sober now, but I'm a fucking basket case in a way that I probably wouldn't be if I hadn't been a junkie for most of my for all of my teens, 20s. It's kind of I got out of it with most of my own teeth, and I didn't catch anything that was going to kill me. And I remember people being like, well, but there's a lot of shit that I did to myself and my body that you can't really see on first, that, I did some damage psychologically and physically.
And to other people.
Yeah. I mean, my parents are both alive, they're very, they're Irish, right? I was raised like in an Irish family in the northwest of England. My mom grew up on a farm in rural Donegal. She left the farm at 14 to go work as a maid in a hotel when her mom died. My dad grew up in Belfast, one of 13 kids in a two-bedroom apartment when the Troubles were on. And then they came to England, they had me, and they had no frame of reference for me because, to them, drugs would, it was like all drugs were just bad. And I was I was this studious, smart kid that was good at school and teaching right. And I think probably it took everybody by surprise when I ended up becoming this massive junkie. And that fucked them up at the time, big time.
I mean, you have siblings, I assume.
No, I'm an only
You don't.
child.
So your dad goes from 12 siblings,
yeah,
to having to only child. You think maybe that was traumatic for him? Maybe he wanted to.
Well, he always tells me he remembers my dad, you'd never catch him in a church unless somebody was dead or getting married. And he'd always be he's like, those fucking priests, they'd be round the house. Oh, Mrs. O'Neill, you can have one more. You've only got 9, because the whole idea then was they were trying to basically outbreed Protestants. So eventually there'd be a generational shift. And it's he still thinks it was God, and she did, it was it was like the church was telling you to do it. And it's
Well,
Shoot
that's
the mic.
maybe that was maybe one motivation for the priests to have lots of kids around. There might be other
Yeah.
motivations
Hello.
too.
Yes.
Hello.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
But yeah,
Tony,
you know,
it's been a pleasure, my friend.
thank you so much for having me. You know, I'm a huge admirer of you. I love the podcast. It's really fantastic that you had me. I'm very, very grateful, and I had a bunch of fun. So thank you.
Oh,
I'm
we're excited
really
to have you.
grateful you're still alive and you're writing about life on the wrong side of the road, the hard road, and it is a hard road to follow. Much success, my friend.